is lesser known, but no less influential. Now, if I say analytical engine, what's the first thing you think of? Anything? Or maybe you think you've never heard of an analytical engine. Or perhaps you know its modern, more common name, the computer. Okay, now what if I say father of the computer? Who comes to mind? Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, maybe Alan Turing, but definitely not a guy named Charlie. Which brings us to our next great scientific mind on today's episode, Charles Babbage, the English mathematician, inventor, and mechanical engineer who is now known as the father of the computer and credited with designing the first mechanical computer, also known as the Analytical Engine. This, of course, was just the initial step to the computer you're carrying in your back pocket or your backpack, but it was built on his original ideas from way back in the 1820s and 30s, which were built on other ideas and originates with a principle openly borrowed from, of all things, a loom. Yeah, our genius, father of the computer, was inspired by a machine that would go on to make t-shirts. Charles Babbage followed in Newton's footsteps, occupying the chair of mathematics at Cambridge. But unlike Newton in his down-to-earth vibe, Babbage was a little lofty and not exactly a people person. Babbage was a devout Christian, however, and an active member of the Anglican Church. He wrote several religious papers, including Reflections on the Decline of Science in England, which express his concern about the moral and spiritual decline of society. He even had a touch of evangelical fervor. He took his math skills and went after skeptics who said that some of his out there stuff was mixed in with the fundamentals of the Christian faith, namely miracles. Wait, are you saying that Babbage used math to prove miracles? Well, he certainly tried. For any skeptic, Charles Babbage's ninth treatise is a must-read. At the time, a philosopher and religious skeptic by the name of David Hume argued against the existence of miracles. David Hume's exact words were this:
"Would God really suspend the laws of nature at a whim?"
To address this wave of skepticism, Babbage used his weapon of choice, mathematics and statistics. Babbage aimed to use natural theology to connect historical accounts in Scripture and prove mathematically that the biblical miracles did not contradict natural law. In his groundbreaking ninth treatise, written in 1837, Babbage viewed miracles not as a hindrance to faith, but rather as an essential aspect of the universe. In his own words,
"It is more consistent with the attributes of the deity to look upon miracles not as deviations from the laws assigned by the Almighty for the government of matter and of mind, but as the exact fulfillment of much extensive laws than those we suppose to exist."
Babbage eloquently dismantled the arguments of Hume, who, according to Babbage, did not understand the mathematical concepts of probability, which was the foundation of the argument against miracles. Babbage used the analogy of a universe as a vast calculating machine. He suggested that if you were observing a machine performing a series of calculations and it produced a number that didn't fit in the pattern, its creator would explain that it was programmed from the start to produce these exceptional results, and that this specific programming was integral to the machine's structure. Similarly, God's intervention in events such as the parting of the Red Sea can be seen as an example of God's pre-programmed exceptions into natural law, revealing his immense power and knowledge, which is pretty incredible and a lot to take in, but it does make sense in a way. In essence, Babbage was making space for both science and faith to sit at the same table and actually be friends. Ultimately, Charles Babbage is best known for his design of the Analytical Engine, which was essentially a giant calculator. And when I say giant, I mean like huge, like the size of a car. This machine could perform the four fundamental functions of arithmetic: addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication. which is really already a feat on its own, but it would be way more than just a calculator. It would act as a computer. It would be able to process decisions in logical functions and would actually have its own internal memory, exactly like our computers today. Sadly, he actually never finished his construction, which is probably why so many people don't know his name. Years after his death, Babbage's unfinished work was literally sitting in the archives of the Science Museum of London, collecting dust. But a new generation of scientists stumbled upon these writings. The scientists began analyzing Babbage's notebooks and literally found the answer to their problems. The principles of computer storage and memory that Babbage had dreamed up was still sound, and thanks to a new 20th century technology, computers that only existed within Babbage's notebooks could actually exist in reality. Though Charles Babbage didn't live to see his legacy fulfilled, he did leave us with an inspiring path to follow. Throughout his life, he remained steadfast in his belief that God can be experienced through science, and that the pursuit of science can bring us closer to God. So, take note, modern-day teachers and academics. There's room at the table for all of us. Instead of seeing faith and the faithful as mortal enemies of science, maybe we can look to Babbage's example and all be friends.